Welcome to the stage and welcome to our conference. And it's my pleasure to moderate you today and have a discussion with you.
Sure.
So you recently were named the Sequoia of Angel Capital. And also you were named among top 25 tech angels by Business Week and top 8 and upcoming VCs by Forbes Midas list. So it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you.
And with your investment fund, you had over 90 investments, and almost half of it you had exits for almost half of it to top companies such as Google and Microsoft and Disney, Intuit, and Cisco recently, the recent one. So can you tell us a little bit more, how did you come up with this idea of having this fund, and how did you start investing in startups?
Yeah, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and I can tell that this is a different conference because the person who introduced me actually correctly pronounced my name, and I'm like, wow, it's like incredible. So anyway, and it's not my first SVOD conference. I think this might be third or fourth, so it's really great to be back and great to see all the new faces. To be honest with you, the Felices Ventures started a little bit of an experiment. It's probably not that dissimilar to the founders that are out there. When I left Google, I was there for 6 years. I was the first PM there, and I was thinking about what to do next. And actually, when I thought about angel investing, which is a very popular thing to do in Silicon Valley, I was actually a little bit nervous in the beginning. So I talked to a bunch of VCs, and I thought maybe I'll work at a VC for a little bit and then do it on my own. But then the funny thing is, like, one of them was so terse to me. He said, look, you were not a senior guy at Google. You have no investment experience. We don't think you can do this. Like, if you feel you can do this, why don't you just go do it on your own? And actually, that was a really great thing for me. And so I did. I started literally like with my own capital as a single person for 4 years. And I didn't know if I was going to be good at it. But then I had a pretty lucky and great ride. And after 12 exits, I'm like, well, something is working really well. Then I had to raise funds. I'm like, look, I want to turn this into a platform. And we did in 2010. We raised our first institutional fund. Have made great progress since then. We now have a team of 7 people, including actually we have a Russian team member as well, Dasha. So I'm just very proud of like how far we came, and we still see ourselves as a startup in venture capital, which is a very staid and old industry, and we're trying to be not just a new kid on the block, but the most innovative and friendly kid on the block.
So let's just quickly go through some questions to understand
Sure.
better the fund. So how big is your fund now?
So we have about a little over 110 million under management. This latest fund is a little over 71 million.
And what is the range of investment?
So we try to adjust the range of investment to fit into any syndicate. So a couple 100,000 to a couple million, and we've done about a dozen deals where we have invested $1 million or more per round.
And what is the focus?
Now, the main focus area is basically mobile, enterprise, e-commerce, education, and health. But most recently, where we're spending most of our time is the intersection of mobile and enterprise, especially in areas like security, the area that we call connected things, sometimes as Internet of Things, sometimes as wearables. That whole general area we're very excited about. And I would say also, as a third area, we're spending a lot more time on platforms and marketplaces.
And so how many investments are you making per year on average?
I think it's just really changing. We're trying not to have these artificial rules of we only make this number or whatever. Clearly, we're watching it, but we're on pace to do anywhere from a dozen to 2 dozen investments per year.
Per year. So everybody knows that investors' return depend on outliers. These are the companies that, sort of 1 of 10 companies that become successful and makes the whole profit for the fund. So how do you generate your deal flow? How do you find these deals? How do you select them? And how do you feel like this is the right company for you?
I think we definitely tried a few things there. There are a couple things that we do that I think is unique. One, I think some of our most successful companies are companies that actually never came to us. Our strategy is one of a prepared mind. So, there's also this talk about due diligence. When a deal comes to you, and I feel in order to be a really good investor and ahead of the curve, you kind of have to do your homework beforehand. So one of the things that we do is we actually look at the areas that we're focusing on and try to figure out what are the companies we're most interested in, try to do our homework beforehand. Also try to understand what are the key aspects that we see as critical to success of these companies, and basically filter the companies based on that. But some of the interesting things, I would say about 10% of the number of companies we get involved are outbound, meaning that those companies never come through our doors. We go find them and somehow convince them to work with us. That 10% actually represents almost 40% of our portfolio. So that's a very unique thing, and it's normally something you see in much bigger funds like Benchmark. It's very unusual. The other thing is, look, we're probably one of the few firms in the Valley. We have 7 people. 5 of them are women, and all 7 of them are international, 100% immigrant DNA. I think it's that go-getter attitude, and it's very unusual. In even our existing Silicon Valley companies, the founders come from 32 countries, and it's something that is very natural to us. So there's also this thing that a lot of times venture capital is like seen as kind of a transaction by transaction, but at the end, it's a human relationship thing. And I think this different DNA that we have, this different background really helps us relate to founders. And this international aspect is also something that doesn't come easy to the native local venture funds here. So as a result, I would say about roughly a quarter of our deals are international. Probably from a value perspective is higher than that, and we're really proud of that. We have investments in 9 countries now.
So how do you manage that? Because Silicon Valley is all about local investments, and obviously funds have their offices, subsidiaries in other countries, but that's something of an exception rather than a rule. So can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. I think almost everything that we do, you're going to hear a common theme, and it's probably we're trying to be out of the box. We're trying to be contrarian. I think it's very difficult to be successful trying to do something that has been exactly the way it's been done before. So one of the ways we think about it is there is this, I feel there is this rule in Silicon Valley that the only way you can do international investments is by having an international office. And yet, I think we've done many investments, like some of our biggest investments like Rovio or Shopify. The funny thing is there are actually very little or no local investors, and yet we've been able to find these companies all the way from Palo Alto and spend months and months and meet them in different countries and continents and convince the founders to work with us. And I think it kind of comes down to, number one, really understanding the topic area and providing some value to the founders where the founders are convinced that we can add them some value. And the second thing is, I don't think necessarily you have to have a local office, but you have to have a local investment partner, and ideally a local law firm you work with. So for every country that we make an investment, we try to find a local law firm if there are any local legal issues that can advise us on that. But other than that, I don't think you need to be present in every country to be able to make a good investment in that country.
So let's touch on Shopify. How did you find them? And did you bring the company over, or you found the company here, the founders here? Just a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good example. So Shopify was a crazy story because I really like cars. So I was on a track one day, and I actually ran into one of the founders of 37 Signals who told me that they were never going to take VC money ever. But it's a very fascinating company. It's a bootstrap company. And I really respected the founder. And we were talking. I'm like, wow, these guys are really great. And then I wonder, I started looking at their site. And at their site, they had an interview with the founder of Shopify, who was one of the early creators of Ruby on Rails. And it was a German guy that moved to Germany, and he wanted to do a snowboarding store, but then had such a tough time doing an online store for snowboards that decided to create Shopify instead with his 2 co-founders who were also great snowboarders. And it became a very successful company. And at the time, we were kind of weak on e-commerce, and I was looking for formative commerce companies. And I saw this company. I'm like, this is amazing. But then I don't know the founder. Just like probably a lot of people in the room, you have target investors, and like you don't know the investor. So I literally went through every single Canadian friend of mine of investor and founder, and I think it was 3 months, and like I had 5 intros to the founder. So finally, in the 6th intro, he returned my mail, and I flew out to Ottawa to meet him. And from that point, we really connected, and some of my early Google experience was really helpful to him, and we really hit it off. And what was really interesting is he was also thinking about some really famous Silicon Valley investors, but he said some other firms, basically when they were talking to him, said, you know what, we don't really come to places like Ottawa. Why don't you come to Sand Hill Road and present to our partnership? And he was very impressed that I cared about the company enough that number one, to be patient, to wait for his response, but number two, to fly all the way to Ottawa and actually take care to meet him and his team and understand why his company was doing so well. And it was a great connection, and we've done really incredible things for them. And it was a really good timing because a couple months after, we were in the process of closing Rovio, and Rovio didn't have an online store. So the CEO of Rovio called me and said, look, we have 10 days to go before Christmas, just like this time, and we want to do an online store, except that we don't have any experience doing an online store. I called up the CEO of Shopify, literally half an hour, and said, look, can you put one of your great engineers? And he did, and in a week, the Rovio store was up. Instantly became the top performing store in Shopify, which had 16,000 stores at the time. Now they have 70,000 stores, and it was a big success for Rovio. They sold out their whole inventory in a matter of days, and to this day, their e-commerce line is one of their most successful revenue generators. So it's a really, really interesting story of thinking out of the box and in unconventional ways.
So you just mentioned that you have to go and persuade the company. How is it possible? Companies should, probably knock on your doors all the time. And you are saying right now something, especially for the international audience, something incredible, that you're actually going and persuading the companies to take your money. Unbelievable. So how does it happen? Is it a love at first sight when you meet the company, or are you doing serious due diligence when you meet with the founder? Say the company comes to you and you meet the founder, you talk to the founder. So how does it happen? Is it something you do a long due diligence? Is it the team? Is it the product? Is it the technology? What is it that attracts you most?
Yeah, I think, look, the best way to describe it is I think our job, we consider ourselves as a boutique venture firm because we're not the biggest venture firm, and we don't make huge investments. We don't make traditional investments. The reason why we call ourselves boutique is we try to make every relationship count as a one-on-one. Our job is to find the best companies, right? So if I just sat on a table and waited for companies to come to me, it means that we don't control our success. So the only way we can be unique and successful is actually take things into our own hands and figure out what are the greatest companies in the areas that we focus on. Our job is to find those companies wherever they are and find a way to get involved with them. That's the reason we are a little bit different. In terms of love at first sight or due diligence, I think it's a little bit of both. There is certainly this chemistry that happens between investors and founders. I think it's a very important thing for the founders to have a feeling that you care about the company, you've done your homework, you have a conviction about the product. There is something that you can do that the founder can relate to. That's the reason that I feel that this will always remain a relationship business. So there is also this trend of crowdfunding and stuff, and I think we're always going to stand out. And in terms of the due diligence, we try to do a lot of the homework beforehand. So I feel that things are moving so fast these days, and so much stuff is online, that if you're trying to make a very quick decision on something that surprises you in 24 hours, it's very hard to do that. A lot of times, one of the side benefits of trying to pursue these relationships is you basically build a relationship over time, and over time you can actually see what each side is made of, right? If you only have a 1-hour meeting, it's very hard to tell what the other party is like. But if you've been communicating with somebody over a few weeks or over a few months, you really see what they're made of. Sometimes you can see how they respond to surprises, and you really build a relationship, and I think that's really, really valuable. And in terms of due diligence, I think one thing that I've seen amongst our most successful companies that we look for is that the best founders and CEOs is not that they have 10 times the number of talent, but they're product visionaries. They're really crazy about a product and do it in a way that nobody else has done before, right? I mean, it's not just about starting a startup and raising money and being an entrepreneur, but these people are really obsessed with some aspect of the product, and they want to do it in a way that has never been done before and is really, really the best in the world. And when we find this, we really get excited, and I think that kind of trumps everything else. Clearly, the data has to also work, but I think that is so much more important than what the exact valuation number is or due diligence. I think sometimes a lot of investors spend time on due diligence because they're unsure about their decision and try to use it as a crutch, versus when you meet the company and the founder, you just have that gut feeling that, wow, this is something really incredible and I really want to do this, and it really comes across to the founders as well.
What about valuation? Does it really matter? if the company is good?
I'm not going to tell you that the valuation doesn't matter at all, but I think the valuation matters a lot less than people think. We've done an analysis, for instance, we had 47 exits, which I think is quite a good data point, or at least a range of good data points, and at least half of their deals were very expensive, where we were literally on the fence. We're like, wow, this is a really expensive deal. Should we do it or not? And every time we did do it for the right reasons, we were surprised that it turned into an exit. So there is this thing also that if the deal is too cheap or the conditions are too good, sometimes there's a reason for that. But I would say that valuation has never, ever stopped us from doing a great deal, great investment, or having a great partnership with a founder.
So when I'm just still going back in my mind with this persuading the companies to take the money, how do you do this? What skills do you bring into the company to make them take the money from you?
I think it's a couple things. Again, one of the ways we're different is a lot of times founders meet investors and it's the same message all over again. The investor overpromises, we have this Rolodex, we can do this, we can do that. I think the first thing we do when we meet the founders is, number one, listen, right? So there's a lot of investors that can't stop talking about themselves. And the one thing we try to find out is, what do these founders really need? And because we have had 47 exits and we already had a range of success, we are not in a rush to get the next exit, and we're not in a rush to make the next investment. We only want it to happen for the right reasons. So we listen and we find out, first of all, if there's a good mutual way that we can work together. Is there's a way that we can help the founder? And there often is, and it's different for every founder, right? Sometimes the founders are like, look, I don't really need to raise money, but I have these early angel investors that I want to consolidate. Sometimes it's like, look, I need this strategic connection. Sometimes it's something else. It's not about the kitchen sink that you can do for them, but it's about the one thing that you can do for them that is really, really important. We've been in situations before where we invested in a company, syndicate of 20 investors, and we haven't done anything for the company for 9 months. But then at a critical moment, I did get the call from the CEO, and he's like, look, I got this offer from Google. I would probably take it, but I want it to be like twice as high, whatever. And we get on the phone. We get them different term sheets from VCs or whatever. And in that case, what we did for them literally allowed Google to increase the offer and resulted in an exit. In another case, we literally connected one of our companies to eBay CTO, and that resulted in an exit. So, the amount of time that it took for us to do that was maybe an hour, and yet for the founder, that was a very formative thing, right? The founder doesn't really, the good founders, you guys are building the companies and nobody knows your business better than you do. Nothing that I can do from week to week is really going to help you. For me to ask you, hey, what are your numbers this week? What have you done for me? Doesn't help you. But when you need something really, really important, like I need to hire the CFO or I need the strategic connection and we can deliver that for you, that's the time when the founders are like, wow, I really needed them to come through for this, and they really did. And so those are the moments that we wait for and that we try to do a really good job.
So everybody loves successes, and with the number of successes that you've had, maybe you can share a couple of failures, and failures are important because you learn from them. So maybe you can share your experience with failures and what you learned from them, and there are two specific things that I want to ask. So one is a failure that you did not invest in the company, and you're now sorry that you didn't. And another one, when you invested in a company and actually it got south, and what did you do? Did you put more money? Did you close the company? What was your decision about it?
So a couple things there. I mean, I can tell you a lot of different stories, but let's take Pinterest, for example. Pinterest is a company that we discovered early. We ended up not investing. It was actually a really crazy story because the founders are ex-Google, I'm ex-Google, and also one of my partners was literally a best man in the wedding of one of the co-founders of Pinterest, and you're like, how the hell can you miss a company like that? And I was actually an avid user in the beginning. I think the problem was we basically overthought it. And I think it comes down to, again, actually Peter Fenton from Benchmark made a really good comment that I'd like to restate. He said that while a lot of investors look for things that can go wrong, we look for things that can widely go right. And I think that's something that we underestimated. A lot of times these companies come to you early on, and it's very easy to dismiss them. I think Evernote was like that. They literally almost didn't make it. and there is very little signal to go by, and I think we just did not appreciate a very key human need that this company was answering, and we also basically completely underestimated how fast they were going to move to mobile. At the time, we were very mobile focused, and they were only on the web, and we didn't want to be involved in a web-only company. We felt everything was going to mobile, and literally, I think 3 to 6 months after we decided not to get involved, they moved to mobile, and we should have known, there's no way for them not to move to mobile. In terms of failures, look, I'm going to tell you one thing, which is you have to fail. You have to try different things. We try different things. The thing that keeps me up at night is that not that we have failures, but we're not responding and learning enough. The other thing that I see from fellow investors and in fact in companies too is that you need to try different things and some of them will fail and learn from them really, really fast and adapt. It is very, very important to us, if you ask me one thing in terms of success, we need to be the most adaptable. And so that's something that we pay a lot of attention to. In terms of investments, look, we have a lot of companies where the line between success and failure is very thin. A lot of times they cross the line in both sides, and it's not really clear if it's going to be a success or if it's going to be a failure. I can tell you a number of companies that could have been just as easily a failure, and that's where I think the true value of the investor comes in. Just like in a relationship, you really value the people that stand by you in hard times and not necessarily partying with you in good times. And there are a number of companies where literally we basically gave them a little bit of money for them to try one last thing, and that resulted in them really making it and turning it into an exit. I can remember examples of companies that had less than 3 months of cash. We encouraged them and made introductions for them that resulted in a strategic exit. So I think the one thing that I'm proud of is, sure, I can talk about the glorious exits we had, but quite a number of the 47 exits could have just as well been zero, but we basically did not give up and work with the founders to find out some way to turn it into somewhat of a success story. And I'm actually more proud of those than the ones we have, like Meraki, which ended up being an over $1 billion exit. It was basically a perfect team at the right place at the right time that did everything perfectly. I feel like that's the Cinderella, the Pollyanna story. But the real success comes from actually taking your regular companies and helping them against these tough challenges.
So where is this line goes, where you help the company or you decide to close the company?
First of all, that decision is not really up to us. I mean, we can make the decision that either we're going to put more money or we're not going to put more money. And one of the reasons we want to have a small fund is that if the fundamentals of the company are really that bad that there is no way of saving the company, we just don't want to put more money into the company. I think that decision is up to the founder. I mean, look, it's not an easy decision, and it's always up. There's been a number of times if the founder says, look, there is still some hope or there is still some way of continuing this, and as long as they come up with a viable strategy of what that's going to work, there hasn't been a single time we haven't supported the founder. On the other hand, sometimes the writing is on the wall, and the best thing to do is cut the losses and move on to have a better day, and that can happen too. It's just nature of what we do, and so that happens too, and we're always very supportive with the founders then as well.
So let's turn to the bright side. Let's turn to some of the successful companies you have.
Yeah.
And if we can go through the stage where you met the company, sort of using it as an example,
Yeah.
How did you select it? Why did you decide to invest in it? What was the competition at that time? And why you decided to go with this particular company if the competition was big, for example, with Fitbit, right? There are so many companies like Fitbit, and yet you invested in it. Yeah. Or maybe we can talk about Inkling. We talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about Inkling, because I think it's a really good example. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because the start of it was very unusual, and hopefully it will be relevant to a lot of people in the room. Inkling is a very good example. The founder came out of Apple, and we met Inkling literally before iPad came out. So there was no iPad, only iPhone. And education is one of our key areas, and I've been obsessed with the fact that the lost innovation in education was the invention of printing press. And I thought as the mobile devices become more pervasive, there has to be a new platform for education, right? I mean, this could be very democratizing in emerging countries as well. So a friend of mine who actually was a very high-ranking guy at Facebook went to school with the founder of Inkling, Matt McInnes, who's originally Canadian, comes from a family of educators, spent 7 years in education in Apple, and literally said, look, this guy is about to start something new. You need to talk to him. When I met Matt, there were 3 people in his team. They were very close friends, 3 co-founders. There was no product. He literally only had some screenshots and a back of the napkin idea of what he was going to build. But there were some really interesting things. Number one, he could not tell me what Apple was about to release, but he said there was a secret product coming from Apple, and he was one of the first 100 people that has seen it. And then the second thing is he had a very sharp vision of what he wanted to build. So there is always this question with the investors, do you invest before traction, after traction? I feel like, look, if you have traction, it's really great. It's a way of us objectively defining if you're going to be successful or not, or at least some objective proof that your company matters to some customers. If there is no traction, then there has to be something that the investor can feel, okay, you know what, I'm willing to bet on the fact that this person is going to build it. In this case, not only did the founder come out of Apple, the founder spent all his life in education, came from a family of educators, was focusing on education, and everything about him and his founders basically said, you know, that they were very capable of building something that's really complex. The one thing that I'm really proud of is, number one, we were the first check written to this company. We put together all the investors for this company, and we did it at a time when you know, this company's competitor was raising $45 million from Andreessen Horowitz. Any other investor would run the hell away from this company and say, Andreessen is putting $40 million into No, that was started by, you know, the founder of Chegg. This thing is going to be a gorilla, and it's going to be an extremely successful. It's a crazy story, right? It's total David versus Goliath. You know, today, if you look at No, actually it didn't do anything. After 45 millions raised, it basically like had some exit to Intel, and I'm pretty sure that that was not a huge exit. I'm really proud of the fact that we raised like literally a fraction of that money for Inkling in the beginning, but the team was amazing, and they had this crazy vision, and they knew what kind of a platform to build, and so they were at the right place at the right time. Now I see that as kind of the next generation publishing and education platform. They have a product called Habitat, which is really popular with publishers, and I'm really proud of it. They have now 110 people. We invested when they were only 3 people, and we invested in every round they had after that. We got them their Series A investor. We got them every angel investor. I found them the CFO. The CFO we brought in was a close friend of mine. I'm always on the board of the company, even though I'm not a formal board member. I'm there because the CEO really values the strategic input. So it's kind of a dream scenario, but again, it's one of those cases where everything is unorthodox, yet it worked, and it's a good example of how this unorthodox thinking can yield great results.
So what would you recommend? What are the challenges for the entrepreneurs nowadays? Are we in Series A crunch? What's happening?
I think the biggest problem is, you know, I think it's a great time for entrepreneurship. It's probably one of the best times to start a company. The toughest aspect of it is that there are so many companies getting created because it has become much easier to start a company that there's a lot of noise. And it's very, very difficult to differentiate signal from the noise, right? We want all of your companies to succeed. And so I think the most important thing becomes, again, the one aspect that I mentioned of like founders that are product visionaries, and the second thing is we're really, really attuned to seeing companies that are unique in some way. If there is like an area where there are like 10 other companies or 15 other companies, I think competition is one of the biggest value killers. Not that I don't like competition, but we're looking for people that are out-of-box thinkers. In terms of Series A crunch, look, I do think that there is definitely this kind of filtering, like you have a lot of companies that raise seed funding, and only a limited number of those can get like the next round of funding. But look, I mean, as a founder, your job is not to worry about like the shock of the day. Today is Series A crunch. Last year it was something else. Next year it could be a financial, you know, event of some sort. You need to build a business in a way that is immune to these shocks. if you're trying to react to the situation at the time it happens, it's almost too late. So, there is no like good way or bad way of raising money or building your company. You have to do it in the most pragmatic way possible. Everything is fair in love and war. There is no such thing as a right answer. There is no such thing as a wrong answer. You got to do whatever it takes to make your company successful, right? If that means that you need to, ask 20 people to make an introduction for you to one person, that is it. If that means you need to ask friends and family for money, that could be it. Whatever it is, right? You need to find your own unfair advantage. There is not one answer that's true for every single person in the room. I think every person is a different situation, but you need to do what's best for you and find out the way to get the best selection of, team members and investors and anybody else, and advisors and anybody else that can help you be successful.
Let's talk a little bit about the technology trends. What do you see happening right now?
One of the things that I'm seeing that I'm very excited about, 5 years ago, I would say what we did was still pretty standard, and it was mostly software and mostly in a few areas. What we're seeing now is that software is now touching very unusual areas. We've gotten involved in a company called Counsel, for instance, where it's software completely reinventing bioinformatics and genomics. Amazon, we see it as an e-commerce company, but it's really a software company completely revolutionizing commerce. We have a company called Solemn. It's actually software touching fertilizer. You'd like, what the hell are you doing investing in a fertilizer company? Except that they found this great technology and software, which could be very important. If you think about, we have, close to 7 billion people, and we need to feed some of them, and some of them are not going to be there. So I think one of the things that I'm most excited about is the unique areas. In the last 6 to 9 months, we invested in a drone operating system company. We invested in a company that can do synthetic DNA. We invested in a company that can read your brain waves and can help you do things by just thinking about them. And the common element amongst all of these is what I call making science fiction reality. The thing that I'm really, really excited is like today, more than ever, it's become possible with the merging of software and some creative hardware devices to do products that maybe 10 years ago we thought would only be possible in Star Wars or Star Trek or something like that. And more, I'm seeing founders, and especially I know that there is kind of a strong Russian connection here. I mean, there is so much brain power that there is literally like no place on earth where this can't really happen. It's just like these crazy ideas, and they're really coming to life. And I couldn't be more excited to find more companies that are attacking really tough problems with really creative technologies.
So my last question is, what are the problems that angels like you encounter with entrepreneurs?
I don't think there is any problems that we find with entrepreneurs. I mean, I really respect, and I just want to tell you guys, I mean, I know that I'm speaking as an investor, but I'm also an entrepreneur because, this group would not have existed if it didn't get started, and I had to raise money just like you. And I think the most important thing to keep in mind is just the same way, we try to listen to our companies. I think at least try to do a little bit of homework, before you approach investors, and just realize that this is not just about writing a check and financing a company. It's about finding something in common and finding somebody that can relate to your problems. So your job number one is actually both people that you hire as well as investors is to establish that connection. It's not about just a transaction. It's not just about writing a check. Why should these people care about your company? The same way, why should you care about them? And sometimes the answer is unorthodox, right? I mean, if you like pottery, for instance, find an investor that likes pottery. If you're into biking, find an investor that likes biking. If you're building a product in enterprise software, find somebody that understands enterprise software. One of the things that I see a lot of entrepreneurs spending a lot of time that I think could be a dead end for them is to basically look at the popular blogs and lists and say, oh, these 5 investors are the most famous investors. I need to go after them. But then you realize that what made them famous are investments that have nothing to do with the company you're building. So there is nothing for these people to relate to you. So even if you're super charismatic and you have an amazing product, they might not relate to you. And that is not a failure of you. It's just that that connection is probably not going to be the most fruitful connection for you. So the best way you can increase your chances is increase your odds by looking at people that are much more likely to get excited, interested in you as a person or your company because of their background, because of their hobbies, because of where they come from, because of languages they speak. I mean, that's the thing that people underestimate. How time after time I meet founders where people tell us, you're a tiny little fund, they're never gonna take money from you, who the hell are you, you're from Palo Alto, they don't know you from Adam, and there's always, you listen to them and there is something that breaks the ice. Like I met a Bulgarian founder and it turns out he's into design and I'm into design. I went into Rovio and to Finland is like, why these people will care about you, and we had an amazing mobile portfolio at the time. Went all the way to Canada and the founder was obsessed with the data warehouse and I was involved in the first data warehouse project at Google. Like there's always something that you break the ice and you make that connection, and that's something that I think is really, really instrumental in having these meetings and follow-ups.
Well, thank you. Do we have questions from the audience? Just please introduce yourself.
So can you talk about your investment on venture and Y Combinator?
Sure. So Y Combinator, I think I started investing in Y Combinator companies in 2006, starting with their second batch ever. And I was one of the very few people that actually did invest in Y Combinator. At the time, I thought, wow, this is an incredibly innovative approach, and I think it was a very interesting move, and it was very eye-opening to become involved in Y Combinator as an investor, as well as in the demo days as backers of companies. VentureBeat was probably an investment that was unusual in the sense that Matt Marshall was just, I mean, he was making incredible things work at the time. Like he basically started with no money and he started the company, and I really related to his struggles and I really wanted to be supportive, but knowing what I know now, I do not know anything about media or blogging. It's not our core focus area. So probably in terms of learning, that's probably an area where I would not make an investment again.
Question which I think is important to a lot of people. When you pay attention to an unsolicited presentation, unsolicited business plan, you only look at presentations that came through connection.
You know, there are times that we do look at unsolicited business plans. I can tell you that it's a very large percentage of the things that we do. I think the toughest thing is, look, we can't, if I spent the time to look at every single thing that came through the door, I could not do my job, right? I mean, first and foremost are the founders that we've already gotten involved in. So I think the only ones that where we do spend the time or more time to look at it and qualify is, number one, did it pass our initial filter of, is this in our focus area? Is this an innovative solution, and is there something that inspires us to take a closer look? So like a lot of times when I meet you guys in the hallways, and if you're interested in talking to me, try to find something like, hey, like, you know, can there be some connection to get to the next meeting? So I think the most important thing is, hey, do we have a connection to this person? If I have no idea who you are, at least like, do we have a connection, like common connection through Anna or somebody else that we know, or one of our founders? Is this something where at least it's an area that we're spending a lot of time? So we're gonna be like, if we're not making any media investments and it's like, hey, we're the leading Russian tech blog or something, it's probably not gonna like resonate very strongly with us because it's not something we're spending a lot of time. And some other aspect of it, like, hey, look, you know, you don't really know us, but here is something we do, and here is some early signs why this is gonna matter. Like, here's 3 people that have used the product and have paid for it, or we basically need some objective sign of why this company is successful, anything other than just the founder saying, I'm super excited about this company, it's a great company, but why is this gonna be successful? Why is it like, why does it matter? Some people like care about it enough that they pay for it or whatever. So, I mean, the harsh reality is like a lot of the unsolicited offers, we're not gonna be able to respond, but we try to do as good of a job as we can to at least say no quickly or explain why it's a good match or it's not a good match to the founders that reach out to us.
More questions? Yeah? Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Aydin.
Thank you for the time.